Once again, good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Palan. I'm the product educator here at DMF. Today we're going to be going over our presentation, Understanding IP Ratings. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time in the presentation just going over IP ratings in general and learning about where they come from and what they stand for. And then towards the end of the presentation, I'll cover a little bit about some of our different IP rated products that we have here at DMF. So we're going to go over really understanding what IP ratings are, breaking them down, specifics about sort of the testing procedures that go into each level. Talk a little bit about IP ratings versus UL listings because they're somewhat similar, but also a little bit different. And then again, follow that up with our IP rated product and some additional resources that we have for you. So to start off, what is an IP rating? An IP rating stands for Ingress Protection rating. It really grades an enclosure's resistance to solids and water. So it's going to tell you how well something is going to stand up to different environmental conditions and how protected the internal components are from the intrusion of solids, namely sort of dust and or larger particles, as well as water. It's important that we know that it's water and not liquids. Part of the IP code does sort of go into additional levels in terms of maybe oil or other liquid substances, but the predominant part of the rating, the main numeral, is related to water. IP ratings are something that are set forth by the IEC, or the International Electrotechnical Commission. The actual code number is, or the standard is 60529 degrees of protection by enclosures, or the IP code. So again, that really defines what each level should protect against, as well as the specific testing procedures for those particular levels. It's also important to note that this IP code is really used for all types of equipment, electronics, enclosures. Of course, we're going to hone in on what it means for lighting fixtures, because that's our industry, but even things down to pelican cases or road cases. All types of things can have an IP rating. It's really just going to describe how well it protects it against the intrusions of liquids, or excuse me, solids and water. One thing that we often ask is, why do we have IP ratings? So a nice thing about IP ratings is that these are independently set standards that really apply across manufacturers and industries. So just like many other ratings, these are set by independent bodies. So it's something that we can all adhere to as manufacturers. And that sort of levels the playing field in a lot of ways for people to understand exactly what a fixture is designed to withstand. So it's really going to help us figure that out in terms of looking at different products and evaluating what environments they can be put into, and really also tell us if it's safe to use that type of fixture in that particular environment. So when it comes to breaking down an IP rating, we have this code that's here in front of us. So we'll always start with IP, and then we'll have two numbers after it. So there's two numerals in there. The first is going to be the rating against solids. The second is going to be the rating against water. So relatively simple. You'll have IPXX, and that tells you exactly what that rating is. There are some supplemental digits, so this is what I alluded to earlier with, for example, if you have oil, but these special digits will come after your first two numerals and can relate to any number of things. So whether it's high voltage, if the enclosure has been in motion during testing, all sorts of different things can be put in there or tested specifically for. In terms of the actual numeral definitions, I'm going to go into all of these in more detail later in the presentation, but this just give you an overview. So for the solids, we have numbers that go from 0 to 6. When you see 0 in the code, that means that there's no level of protection at all. So it means that they've tested to a certain level, but it did not pass that level at all. 6 or 9, so 6 for solids and 9 for water, are the highest levels of protection that you can attain. And then if you see an X in the code, so for example, IPX4, means that it hasn't been tested for that particular category. So if it's an X4, it means that we haven't tested for solid intrusion, but it's a level 4 for water. So that really comes into play because manufacturers, when they go to test their equipment, have to actually apply to be tested to a certain level. In other words, you don't sort of start at 0 and work your way up. You say that, oh, we want to test to IP54, and then the tests for 5 and 4 are done, and whether it's a pass or fail for those two levels. So in other words, a manufacturer can choose not to test for one of those 2 different levels if it's either not applicable or they know it is maybe not necessary. In terms of testing procedures, testing is going to be carried out by independent and accredited either ISO or IEC labs. So that's a really other important part of it. Again, the standard is an independent standard, and these are done by accredited and independent verifiable labs that are doing this testing. One thing to note, an abbreviation that we have here is called EUT, or the equipment under test. This is used a lot throughout the code, so just something to be aware of. You'll see it in some of the upcoming definitions and testing procedures. But each numeral that we test to, or that is tested to, has a specific amount of time that it's tested for and or volume requirements often, specifically when it comes to water usually. Some testing levels or lengths of time may be tested, or specified by the test requester or the manufacturer. This often comes into play when we talk about full submersion in water. They might test to a specific depth and for a specific amount of time, in which case that IP code will sort of be amended by those specific stipulations. So that equipment under test is really subjected to those conditions for a certain amount of time, and then examined afterwards. So it's taken apart and seen if there's been any intrusion of water or anything into that enclosure that would compromise the equipment. And then again, like I said, manufacturers have to do or rather request a specific level of testing, so they go in and select those 2 numerals that are tested against. So diving a little bit more into the different levels and the testing procedures. So for solids levels 0 through 4, these are sort of really the most basic levels of testing. Again, 0 is going to have no protection against ingress of solid objects. 1 through 4 works their way up in terms of basically the size of the object. So level number 1 is protected against an object greater than 50 millimeters in diameter. So this is pretty similar to maybe like a finger. Level number 2 is an object that's not greater than 12.5 millimeters. So it's sort of, excuse me, I always mix these two up. That 12.5 millimeters is about a finger. 50 millimeters is a pretty large object like a hand. Level number 3 is down to 2.5 millimeters. This is more akin to like a screwdriver. And then level number 4 is protected against 1 millimeter objects. So usually like a wire or a piece of coat hanger type, that sort of diameter object. All these testing levels are relatively straightforward. The equipment is probed by these different size probes. So they have different specific ones that are a certain length and of course diameter that match that different level. And then the testers use those probes to make sure that they can't access any of the internal components in that piece of equipment. Levels 5 through 6 both pertain to dust. So this is where it becomes quite more stringent on the solid side of things. Level number 5 is dust protected. So there's really limited ingress of dust into the enclosure, really to a level that won't interfere with the operation of the equipment. Level number 6 is going to be fully sealed and dust tight. So there's no ingress of dust whatsoever. Both of these are tested in this dust chamber. So there's a specific chamber that's built to certain standards, and the equipment is put within that, and then dust is blasted from all directions for a certain amount of time. And then again, that piece of equipment is opened up and tested afterwards. Moving on to water, so levels 0 through 4, again, are really sort of the lower levels of resistance to water. Again, 0 is no protection against ingress of water whatsoever. Really meet the standards for level 1. Level number 1 is protected against vertically falling water droplets. So this is sort of, again, the most basic level of protection. All of these levels are tested in a chamber like the one to the right. So on level 1, they use the water droplets that come vertically from the top of the enclosure. So they just fall straight down and the object is set on that platform. Level number 2 is protected against vertically falling water droplets, but with the enclosure tilted at 15 degrees. So it gives a little bit of a tilt, and same thing, that's done for 10 minutes and then inspected. Level number 3 is protected against spraying water. So the sort of half circle or semicircle bar that you see in that enclosure, it runs and it rotates from 60 degrees in either direction. So a little bit past 45 and then goes back and forth. So that oscillates for 5 minutes while spraying water. And then level number 4 is from 180 degrees. So we're just expanding that range going all the way around. So it's giving you a little bit more sort of assurance that you're coming from, all directions. Moving on to 5 and 6, this becomes a little bit more stringent or more difficult to meet in these cases. So these are different levels of water jets. So level number 5 is really protected against what they call splashing water or water jets. So there's some very specific requirements here. This machine that you see on the right is something that's used in these sort of testing parameters. There can be stationary ones, or for larger pieces of equipment, they're often manually operated by a human. But that equipment has a certain nozzle diameter, flow rate, pressure that's going to come out of that nozzle, and that's what this is tested with. So this is level number 5 is approximately about 5 psi, so relatively low level pressure, and that is sprayed all around the enclosure for 5 minutes. Level number 6 ups that pressure to about 15 psi, so a little bit stronger, and similar conditions, testing for about 3 minutes. Sorry, the heading here should say levels 7 and 8, as they do in the chart, but water levels 7 and 8 are higher level protection. These are submersion in water. So IP level 7 is protected against submersion in water between 15 centimeters and 1 meter, so basically up to 1 meter, and it's submersed for 30 minutes. Level number 8 is really protected for continuous submersion in water. So the difference between the two of these functionally tends to be more periodic submersion or continuous submersion. In other words, something that's made to be fully submerged all the time. So level number 8 is submerged beyond 1 meter for a specified duration from the requester. So it just goes a little bit further in that way. Level number 9, this is the most intense level that there is for protection against water. And this is protected against high pressure and high temperature water jets. So this is quite a large leap actually from some of the previous levels. So there's this very sort of specific testing chamber, or again, they'll scale it up for larger objects. But these nozzles are angled at certain angles. They're using 1500, about 1400 psi, so it's a lot of pressure, and the water is 80 degrees Celsius, so 176 Fahrenheit. We're getting pretty close to boiling at this point. So really extreme conditions. This is the highest level of protection against water. So quite stringent in that case. One thing to sort of note, so I've gone through each of these different levels on their own. It is theoretically possible to have an IP rating that is maybe IP 09. However, given the sort of realities of physics and the world that we live in manufacturing, there are a lot of common IP ratings that you see just because of the way that things are constructed and enclosed and all of that. So some of the more common ones that you see here include something like IP20. So it's really protected only against solid objects, finger-sized things, no water protection really. This is something you see often for like decorative fixtures or maybe some LED tape that's really has no level of protection whatsoever. IP44 is another common one. We see that as sort of a moderate protection. So wire-sized objects and splashing water. So it's a good level of protection. This is something you often see for fixtures that are listed as UL damp location. Another one we see are IP65. This is pretty common for outdoor fixtures. So these are going to be fully dust tight, the highest level of solids, and protecting against water jets, so a high level of water protection as well. So these are often what you see for UL wet listed, exterior and uncovered area type applications. And then finally, IP68 or IP69 is a very highly protected rating. So we're fully, again, dust tight, able to be submerged in water continuously, and or if that's 69, a high level of pressure and temperature. So these are the most extreme conditions that you might see, fixtures that are meant to be submerged and used underwater, and in the most sort of extreme environments. A little bit to touch on about IP ratings versus UL listings. So really both do sort of convey similar information. I should take a step back and note that a UL listing in general covers a number of different things. So whether it's related to safety, installation, temperature, installation environment. But all listings also contain a specific portion that are dry, damp, or wet listed. And so that's what most closely equates with our IP ratings here. UL listings are set by the underwriter's laboratory. So again, I think a lot of us are familiar with UL and see it on a number of pretty much all of our products. There are fewer levels of definitions and versus sort of the more specific levels for the IP rating. So again, UL has dry, damp, and wet versus, again, we've seen a large number of levels for the IP ratings. So different sort of levels of meaning there. The UL listings have some subcategories for wet listings, so that's something to note. So dry is really for dry areas only. Damp is great for, or meant to be used in like shower areas, or rather, excuse me, bathrooms, places that are going to be sort of humid and damp, but not exposed directly to water. And then wet location has these three subcategories. So there's covered ceilings only. So this is something you see a lot for downlights, where when it's installed in a covered ceiling, it's protected from below the ceiling. But if you were to pour water from the level above it, if there's a bathroom leak or something, that's not going to be protected in that case. There's low mounting. So within 4 feet of the ground, you often see these for like step lights and things that are mounted within the wall or sort of within the general area of the ground. And then there's ground-mounted recess. So this is okay for periodic submersion. You note that UL listing doesn't go to the extreme level of full submersion or continuous submersion. That's sort of a place where you'd really want to look for an IP rating that dictates that. Onto sort of now really the DMF product that we have available with our IP-rated options. So there are a number of different options with the M and X series cylinders to start with. So the M series has a number of options here that are going to be IP rated. And specifically when we say IP rated, we're talking about something that's IP65 or higher. The rest of our fixtures, we do not go under IP testing for anything that's like a damp location. So our downlights, some of our other cylinders that are damp location, we have those listed as UL listed for damp location use, but we don't put those through through IP testing. So anything that we refer to in the DMF catalog that is IP rated is at least IP65. So in other words, for your outdoor uncovered applications and potentially, splashing water jets and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of our cylinders, M and X series both have options between 2,000 and 1,500 lumens between the two of them. There's a number of different trim types that can be used in these different applications. So including some of our decorative trims. So this is, for example, a 4-inch pendant mount for the M series with a decorative trim that is IP rated. We have wall mounts for both families that fit into these categories. So the X series is our 3-inch diameter cylinder body that has a wet listed option or an IP65 listed. One thing to note about our wall mounts, they always have this wider bracket for any IP rated options. So that gives you a sort of a wider mounting bracket. It's also gasketed on the side here. We do recommend caulking around that after the final installation, just to give you the most level of assurance. But these can even be configured in options that have uplights and downlights. So we have a lot of options here, a nice fully sealed lens on that uplight option to give you a fully full up-down configuration in an IP65 rated fixture. Our pendants are available without the uplight, so we have a downlight configuration in a number of different sizes and lengths. The M series is available with the stem mount, and the X series is stem and cord mounted options. And then our surface mounts, most of those configurations are able to be done in a wet listed option because they're surface mounted to the ceiling. It's a little bit simpler in a lot of ways. We just have to worry about the bottom trim being IP65 rated. One thing to note, if you're looking at any of our cylinders on the cut sheets, there are little water droplets next to any option that's going to give you an IP65 rated option. So just follow those water droplets if you know that you need a wet listed / IP65 cylinder to be built. So you just follow those water droplets and all those different options for the product builder. Another cylinder option that we do have is really more in sort of our essentials line, or a much more affordable line, is the H series wall mount cylinder. It's a little bit more simple in terms of the configuration. We have the H series module, which is up to 950 lumens, 3 different CCTs between 2700, 3000, and warm dims. We have one fixture size or cylinder size, so it's a 6.5-inch length with a downlight option. And same sort of wider mounting bracket. This does come under the 4-inch ADA requirement. So that's a nice option that meets the ADA listing and is available in black and white. So great exterior rated wall mount cylinder that comes in at a really affordable price point. Finally, we do have some different trim options as well. So both of these are going to be for the M series family. So for one, we have our M series Vandal trim, which is available really for the M series commercial downlight. So these are our non-IC rated fixtures that can accommodate these. These are going to give you a number of different ratings. So for one, this is an IP66 rated trim, so really a little bit higher level of protection against water, and also an IK10 rated lens. So the lens on the inside here is the highest level of impact rating as well. It's a 2-piece system. So we have this collar that goes into a new construction housing. That's going to give you a set of screw holes in the back here, which the trim itself can screw into. Those screws in the front here are Torx security screws, so it gives you a more tamper-resistant, vandal-resistant design, and is also anti-ligature as well. So great number of sort of different options, or rather ratings on this fixture aside from the IP66 rating. Finally, this is also a white antimicrobial paint, so good for certain NSF listings or NSF needed areas. It's a standard flange that's available, so not in flangeless, partly because of that IP rating. Has a gasketed foam piece on the back here that is going to hold tight against the ceiling. So that's another reason we have those screws, is to hold that tight inside of the fixture collar and the ceiling. It gives you a really nice secure finish, and overall a lot of protection for the fixture that's inside. The next trim that we do have is going to be our M series IP and coastal trim. So it's quite similar in construction to our Vandal trim that we just looked at, except it is slightly different. So this is available in the round style only, not square. So that's one reason you might opt to go with the Vandal trim, is if you somehow do need a square downlight. The nice thing about the marine grade, or the IP66 coastal trim, is that this is also a marine grade finish. So the paint is rather not a paint, it's an epoxy powder coat that's finished over the entire trim. So it's going to give you a really ultra durable marine grade finish as well. So any sort of coastal areas that are susceptible to corrosion and all that salt fog, this is going to be your best level of protection against that. So the trim itself is very similar. On the inside, we have, again, a collar system that goes into a new construction housing, and then these 2 screws that hold the base trim in. It's the same IP66 rating and IK10 rated lens. The nice part, though, is that we have this cover piece that goes over the entire trim, so that screws in over the trim itself and gives you a very nice, clean finish for your final installed product. So you don't have any visible screw holes when you have it installed, in a ceiling like such. It looks nearly identical to our other M series trims. So same sort of proportions, pretty much the same overall diameter, just a slight bit larger because of that cover piece. It has these little notches here to be able to remove it in the future if you need to, if it's screwed in tight and sort of set in after a while. But gives you a really, again, high level of protection, IP66 rated, marine grade finish, IK10 rated. So a large number of ratings here that are associated with that and going to give you really the highest level of protection for your exterior and coastal areas where you're installing your downlights. With that, I just want to point you all to one more additional resource that we have. So we do have all of this information that I covered today in a technical bulletin that is on our website. So under additional resources, or rather resources and the additional resources tab, our technical bulletins are all listed, and you'll find this IP ratings technical bulletin. So it goes over all of these different levels, how we test for them, as well as specific resources and the footnotes, places where you can find the standards and all of that. So if you're looking to cover any more of this in depth or have sort of this as a resource, that is available for you all as well. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. If anybody has any additional questions, I'll keep my eye on the Q&A for a few minutes. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us, and I'll hope to see you all again soon.